Hello everyone, this is Nairi from Low Carb and Fasting. Our guest today is a registered dietitian from Canada. She is a public speaker and she's the author, she's a cancer survivor, I have to say that first, and she's the author of, hear this, Hacking Chemo, Using Ketogenic Diet, Therapeutic Fasting, and a kick-ass attitude to power through cancer. Martha Tettenborn, welcome to Low Carb and Fasting.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to see you again and be able to talk to you and your audience.
This is such a delight for me. I've been looking forward to this. Talking about your book, I absolutely loved it. First of all, thank you for sharing a copy of your book with me. I didn't have to purchase this one, so I have to obviously make the public aware. I did not purchase the book. Martha very kindly shared it with me. Now, I loved the short chapters because you kept the chapters short. The chapters were targeted to very specific questions. I like that. I like that very much.
Thank you.
And the whole book was totally relatable. I haven't gone through cancer, but I could relate to all your experiences, the joys, the troubles, the worries, all of the pain, all of it. So I could relate to all of that. You also, okay, so you shared the personal story of your cancer sort of journey, but you also included a lot of relevant science. You have 32 numbered citations, 4 pages of recommended readings of research material, plus a large number of books that you recommend to the readers of your book. Martha, the book starts with a beautiful poem by Marianne Williamson. I loved. I wonder if we can get back to it and read that because I would like you to read it. I've heard you in other podcasts read the poem, and maybe we can end this podcast with you reading that poem.
Sure, I would love to.
Now, but I'm healthy. I'm healthy. You were a healthy person.
I totally was a healthy person.
You were a healthy person. You were fit. You exercised. You're a dietitian, right? So you probably ate a healthy diet or balanced diet, as people would have called it in those days. So it must have come as a shock. What happened?
Oh, totally came as a shock. So I mean, yes, I was a dietitian, but I had discovered low carb in about 2013, 14. By 2016, I was certified as a Primal Health coach because I decided I really needed to put my money where my mouth was and get some more science and get another certification to be fully aware of the low carb world. And so I was healthy. I had just gotten back into running that summer. I was 58 years old. I take 0 medications. Nothing hurt. Like I wasn't, I was aging awesomely, which was my goal, age awesomely. I've always said I plan to live to 95 and die with my boots on. So that concept of living long but dying fast. When the time comes, you're done, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to spending 20 or 30 years dying by inches. I wasn't interested in that. So that's where I was at 58. And it was actually doing an exercise when I discovered I had an ovarian cyst. Well, I discovered I had a big bulge in my abdomen. It's actually the way it started. I have a friend who exercises, and she had sent me a text message and said, "So, what are you up to on your plank?" And she knew I was I had planned to get back into doing some body weight exercises and stuff. And I hadn't done one in a month or two. So I just got off the sofa and laid down on the floor. And as soon as I laid on the floor in my stomach, I could feel that there was something in my lower abdomen that hadn't been there before. It felt like I was laying on an egg. And, I kind of reached under and poked it a bit and kind of went, "This is not good." sat up, called my doctor's office, made an appointment. And so I had an ultrasound, which showed a large ovarian cyst of about 15 to 16 centimeters, which is about 6 inches. So already big. And so then I had an appointment with a local gynecologist. I had blood work done, which included a cancer marker, because my family doc said, I don't expect it's cancer because it's just a big fluid-filled cyst, but we will do this lab work because the gynecologist is going to want to know. And the lab result for this particular marker is called a CA-125, and it was 42, and normal goes up to 36. So it was like barely elevated. People with ovarian cancers get diagnosed in the hundreds to thousands in their CA-125, and mine was like, and the doc said it's not even that great a test. So, other things can affect it. So it's not cancer. And I went to see a gynecologist, decided to have it laparoscopically removed. She said the same thing. If I thought this was cancer, I would be sending you to the regional cancer center oncologist, but I could do this here. And so it was about 2 months from the time I found the cyst until I had the surgery. Canada has wonderful paid for socialized medicine, but it does mean that sometimes you reach term. And then no biggie, right? So I had the surgery, and they ruptured the cyst in my abdomen and pulled it out through a little inch-long incision. And 6 days later, I was home recovering, and I got a phone call from the surgeon's office saying, the doctor would like to see you. Come tomorrow morning, bring your husband. And I got off the phone and kind of went, oh crap, I know what that means. Because I work in healthcare, so I mean, I get it, right? And so that was the start of my cancer journey. It turned out to be stage 1, high-grade serous carcinoma, ovarian cancer, but it had been ruptured inside my abdomen, so I had to continue with treatment.
And they only found out what exactly it was after the surgery, right?
Oh yeah. Like any surgery, they send everything off to pathology and get it looked at. And there was a misdiagnosis at first, and because it was confusing, they sent the sample off to London to get looked at, which is the regional cancer center that I worked with. And they couldn't figure it out. They sent it off to Toronto to another committee or something, and they're the ones that changed the diagnosis to high-grade serous carcinoma, stage 1C2. So, yeah.
I think at this point, people might be wondering, I mean, you're a healthy eater, you're fit, you actually do, what could have caused it? I mean, there's thousands of things
Who
that
knows?
who knows? But
Yeah,
you do actually mention genetics. You mentioned your mother's story. Can we quickly share your mother's story? I was
absolutely.
like
I love
reading that, and I just fell in love with your mother, actually, that I've never met, obviously. So let's share her story.
Today, March the 6th, 2024, is my mother's 100th birthday.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We couldn't have chosen a better day to record this.
Couldn't have chosen a better day.
Let's remember her. Because she was a warrior. What a warrior.
She was a warrior. My mother had polio from the age of 7. She was quite disabled. She was the oldest child the first baby in her family of remote rural Bruce Peninsula farmers. And when she was 7, she was diagnosed with polio, and it was a fight to keep her alive. And she ended up with very bad scoliosis in her spine and one leg shorter than the other. She never had to do the iron lung thing. It was physical with her, but multiple surgeries as a young girl. And yet she grew up with this indomitable spirit. And so she went off to Secretarial College and got her diploma and left here to go to Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada, where there was this huge pool of secretarial people that supported all of government. And she joined as a single woman. She using one cane, I guess at that point. She headed across the country on her own and lived in a rooming house and had this full-time job as a secretary. So she was a real trailblazer, despite her handicap. And while she was there, she met my father, and she was in her mid-30s when I was born, and my dad was in his late 30s. So they were late bloomers, the both of them. However, when I was 9 years old, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that was in 1969. And the treatment at the time was a radical mastectomy, which was a huge scarring, deforming surgery that goes right from the lymph nodes in your armpit. The incision went all the way down across her breast, right into the middle of her abdomen. They took out like chest wall muscle, and like it's just a huge surgery. It's an awful thing. They don't do it anymore, but she fought through that as well, and came home, and a few years later she started having a number of years later, like probably about 8 years later, she started having pain in her hips and her back, and it was thought that it was arthritis. Then they thought it was bursitis. Now this is a lady that's all twisted up and only about 4'10" and walked with a cane, and so they just thought she was wearing, her joints were wearing out. But it turned out to be bone cancer, metastasized from the breast cancer. And so she, at that point, 10 years later, radiation was a treatment option that was available. It was called cobalt treatments at the time.
Mm.
And so she went to London and had cobalt treatments over the course of one summer. She stayed in hospital all summer. And London is about a 7-hour drive from where we lived at the time. So it was a real big deal. And she came home and had a few months at home, and then lost the use of her legs. So she ended up back in hospital, and she died in March of 1979. So 45 years ago from last Sunday, like from 3 days ago. She died 3 days before her 55th birthday. But her spirit and her joy in life and everything about her it informed a lot of who I am and who I became, and also how I went through my own cancer journey.
And what you preach in the book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that kick-ass attitude.
Yes.
We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's get back to your surgery, Martha. And okay, so so you went through, was it chemotherapy, right?
Yes. After the surgery, I had 2 surgeries, and then I went through chemotherapy.
Let's talk about the chemotherapy experience. And at what point did you then decide, okay, I'm on a low carbohydrate diet already, but I'm going to now employ ketogenic or therapeutic fasting and ketogenic diet? Because you use both of those.
Yes, that happened fairly early in the process. Once I realized I had cancer, I knew that I wasn't going to just accept the status quo, that I was going to do a deep dive and see what else I could do. Now, this was 5 years ago, so there's less information around than there is now. This area of metabolic therapy around cancer has literally exploded in the last 5 years. And I've been really, blessed to be part of that explosion. But there was not a lot. I did find Miriam Kalamian's book, Keto for Cancer, and Naisha Winter's book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. I found Dr. Seyfried. I found Dr. Dom D'Agostino, Adrian Shank. And what was really impactful was Dr. Walter Longo in California, who did the work specifically on fasting around chemotherapy for the reduction of side effects. I was an absolute pill virgin, like a medication virgin. I took nothing. Like I struggle to take vitamin D in the winter because I live in central Canada, right? And it's like, I was terrified of chemotherapy. I was terrified of the poison aspect of it, right? And the side effects and how sick it was going to make me and so on. So when I found this information on using fasting to reduce side effects, I was all in. I just dove into that. And And so that's how I kind of got started with looking at, number one, being in ketosis, number two, using fasting as an adjunct right around the time of chemotherapy.
Mm.
And that became huge for me. I was an N=1 experiment. I refused to be my own control subject. I did not ever eat through any of my 6 rounds of chemotherapy. I did them all fasted, and I did a 72-hour fast each time. So that all started before I even had my second surgery. So it was highly recommended to me that I do a hysterectomy, kind of complete what they call the standard of care for ovarian cancer, which is to kind of remove all the female gynecological parts. And it allowed them to have a good look around, make sure that they didn't see anything else. But also I had made the decision to have one of my chemotherapies delivered in an interperitoneal version. So instead of putting it in through a vein, they took one of my drugs and they actually just poured it into my abdominal and pelvic cavity so that it swished around all of the organs in there. That's because high-grade serous carcinoma is a kind of cancer that likes to stick to the outside of other things in the pelvic cavity and seed more tumors. So it's not an escape artist. It doesn't get into your lymph and into your bloodstream and go to remote sites the same way that some other cancers do. It's more of a sticky cancer. So I made the decision to have one of my drugs, the one called carboplatin, delivered interperitoneally. So I actually, the chemo port, the little port that people have put into their shoulder up here to deliver chemotherapy into one of their large veins, I had the same port installed, but mine was on my rib cage underneath my breast. And it had a long tube that actually went right down into my pelvic cavity near where my uterus would have been. And the second chemo would just get hung on an IV pole and it would just run in. So they would fill me up with a couple of liters of this fluid. And then it was my job to slosh around. Like I had to literally lay on, I had to do this laying down, and I had to roll one way and then roll the other way and make this chemo kind of go around all those internal organs. And so, yeah, that was, one of the things I had to decide in doing it that way. I had to do all my chemotherapy at the regional cancer center, which is 3 hours away from where I live. So that was a big decision for me. I could have done chemo in my own city, in the satellite office of the cancer center, where a hospital where I used to work. I mean, so I'm familiar with it. I would have probably known the people. But I made the decision to do the peritoneal route, and that meant I had to drive 3 hours to get to my treatments and 3 hours home. And it was winter in Ontario. So
was that totally sort of out of standard practice at the time, or?
No, it was offered because of the kind of tumor it was. And so when my diagnosis was changed from the misdiagnosis to high-grade serous, then I was offered this option. And my feeling at the time was, hit me with your best shot, because I only plan on doing this once, right? That was kind of when it came to chemo, it's like, okay, fine, we're going to do this. Just hit me with whatever it takes, because I really only want to do this once. And so the interperitoneal was the decision I made.
Martha, I've interviewed other cancer survivors on this channel, and I've heard various different stories about the attitude or the support from the oncologists who are treating them. So in some cases, people have said, no, they wanted to fight my decision doing a ketogenic diet. They just wanted to force their own diet or their own sort of whatever decisions on me. In another case, I was told, in fact, that was Bruce Schnack I interviewed just last week, and he said they didn't support him with the ketogenic and fasting sort of strategies, but they just didn't fight him. Now, in your case, you do say in the book, your oncologist's advice to you was, own your decisions.
Yes.
about that.
Yes. So I had an incredibly hard time making the decision to have the second surgery and have a hysterectomy. I mean, it's not like I was 58. It's not like I was using those parts. But on the other hand, I was of the opinion that, you know, if God put them there, they should probably be there. And why would I take out a perfectly good uterus for no real reason, right? Both the ovaries and both the fallopian tubes are already gone in the first surgery, but it's a big incision, and so I had a hard time making that decision that I was going to go that route. I was also a surgery virgin. I mean, I've had 2 kids and I've had like 0 surgeries in my life other than, you know, a hernia repair when I was 5 years old. Like nobody's cut me open for anything. So it was a big deal to make that decision. And when I did finally agree to it, my doctor reached over and patted my arm and he said, "Good for you." He says, now own that decision. Don't sit here and second guess yourself. Right. Mm-hmm. As far as though the ketogenic diet part, we didn't really even have that discussion. What I found in talking to most people, if you don't bring up in an appointment how you eat, the doctor will never ask.
Yeah.
And so you could be eating chips and hot dogs twice a day. They're not going to ask, and they're really not going to care, because most of them don't think it really has any impact on the treatment or your prognosis or anything, right? If you start struggling to get enough in because of the side effects of cancer treatment or the surgeries or whatever, then yes, they'll send you to a dietitian. But the dietitian is unlikely, unless you're in one of those lovely, lucky places, to be familiar or supportive of the ketogenic diet. So I basically just didn't say anything. And in fact, even with the fasting for my first couple of chemos, I didn't say anything. I just did it. Because, you know, they're really, like, if I'd gotten into trouble in the chemo suite, yes, it would have come out that I was fasting. But I didn't, and everything was fine. So for the third treatment, I arrived at my chemo appointment, the clinic appointment pre-chemo, with a whole sheaf of papers, of abstracts of all these research articles that I had read and looked at and decided all about the metabolism of cancer using fasting and all that stuff. Had it all stapled together. There's probably 20 sheets. And I handed it to my oncologist and I said, "This is what I've been doing." And he kind of, clinic visit, you got to understand, clinic visits are like a 5-minute interview with the doc. They're there so that the doctor can make sure that you are in good enough shape that he can write the prescription for the next chemo. Because they don't write the prescription ahead of time. Those drugs are too expensive for them to even, you know, think about writing them and then wasting them. So they walk in and they ask you about side effects. They had your, you know, you've seen the nurse, you've had your weight check, you had your labs done, and they want to make sure that you're not having any problems and that you can stand the next full dose. Otherwise, they might put you off for a week. They might reduce the dosage to, you know, by 25% or 50% or something. That's the point of that clinic visit. So I show up with this whole pack of papers and I want to have a discussion. And he's like, he kind of rolled them up, you know, the way guys roll papers up. Like they'll take them and they'll just kind of do this sort of thing and go, "Yeah, you know, different things work for different people."
That was all.
Okay, then. I don't know how many people he's probably had walk in and say, "Yeah, I've gone completely vegan, plant-based, you know, I'm juicing, blah, blah, blah." And he probably has the same response. But at the end of my chemo, when I had an hour to sit down and actually have a conference visit with him about for the future and stuff, we did talk about the things that I had done. And I was able to kind of explain to him. And then a year or so later, when my book was published, I wrote him a letter to thank him for his part in my journey. And I sent him a copy of the book and said, "This is what has come out of our time together." In the book, he is Dr. S. I never named him. But yeah, he was a big part of, I was so lucky the way it worked out. I had one oncologist from the initial visit. He was the surgeon. He was the clinic doctor who set up all my chemos, like, you know, and then at the end, he was the one that did the little day surgery operation to take my chemo port out again. And so I just had like one person to deal with the whole time, and he was a wonderful, wonderful man. So I feel very blessed that way.
Martha, you mentioned metabolism of cancer. So let's talk about the science of that. So metabolic uniqueness of cancer cells is what is the phrase you've used in the book. I love that, metabolic uniqueness. They have unique metabolism. Let's talk about, in other places in the book, you do say cancer cells have damaged metabolism.
Yeah, damaged
Talk
as
about the
compared to
science.
how a healthy cell works. Yeah.
Let's talk about the science.
Sure. So metabolism is the way that your body uses fuel to create energy in order to do the things that your body has to do. And we do that on a cellular level. So every one of the millions of billions of cells and trillion, anyways, we have millions and millions of cells, and every one of them has its own energy generation process, a little furnace taking place inside the cell. It's actually an organelle or another little piece of the cell called a mitochondria, and in that is housed a metabolic pathway, so a chemical reaction pathway that takes fuels, substrates like blood sugar or fatty acids or ketones, and it will run them through that metabolic pathway, and the product of that is a molecule that can be broken apart to release energy. So that molecule is called ATP, and it is the actual energy currency that your body uses. So your cells don't use sugar directly, they don't use fatty acids directly, they use them to create ATP. ATP, when that cell breaks apart, creates energy. Okay, but nuclear fission. It's not nuclear, but it's the same idea. Breaking a cell releases energy, or breaking a molecule releases energy, a chemical bond. So that mitochondrial process requires oxygen, and it takes place in every one of the millions of cells in our body. What we have discovered is that cancer seems to choose a different way of creating ATP. And the way that they do it is much more ancient. It's more like what bacteria and stuff use. They will break down sugar with a chemical reaction that happens in the fluid of your cell. So not in the mitochondria, but in the fluid. And it's just an almost instantaneous chemical reaction. They'll take a glucose molecule and they will break it into a lactic acid molecule and a hydrogen gas molecule. And that release of energy, when they break that, creates ATP. It's not efficient, but it's very fast. And I mean, all our cells are capable of doing it, but healthy cells choose to do the mitochondrial process
Through oxygen.
Almost exclusively, yes. So if, for example, you have a sudden release of adrenaline, you have to run from a bus or something, or run from the tiger in the jungle. The energy that fuels your muscles to get you out of that situation will be made by that fermentation process in the fluid of your cell. Like, we all have the ability to do it, but cancer cells do not seem to have the ability, or choose not to use in some cases, we're not sure, because this is all very young science, to use the metabolic pathway that's in the mitochondria. And in fact, some cancer cells have damage to their mitochondria. You can actually see it on electron microscopes that their mitochondria is the beautiful internal structure called cristae. They're actually damaged, like they're all mucked up. And so they don't work properly. What that means is that the energy substrates that can be used in the mitochondria can't be used very well by cancer cells. So that's things like fatty acids and ketone bodies. Mm. But cancer cells will almost exclusively use this fermentation process. And for that, you need either glucose molecules or glutamine, which is an amino acid that is incredibly abundant in the human body. It's the most common of our amino acids that float around in the blood. So that's sort of the difference. When I started studying this and realizing that metabolism was different, I mean, metabolism is about fueling for energy. Fueling is about food, and food is my shtick. Like that, I'm a dietitian. That's like, we're talking food, right? So there's things you can do in terms of food that will actually impact on how cancer metabolizes. Like, who knew? I had no idea. I mean, I've been a dietitian for 30 years at that point, 30 plus, and I had no idea. And I've been a low carb dietitian. I still had no idea. I was gobsmacked that this was out there, and that this was a thing. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody seems to be using it. It was in its infancy, and so I thought, well, I'm not waiting. And so that's when I sort of created my own protocol for the fasting. And I was already doing pretty much doing keto before I went into my surgery at the beginning of December. And I ate keto in the hospital, which is a really hard thing. Hospital food is awful. But once I started then I came home and had Christmas, and there was some not quite so keto over in Christmas. But as soon as I started my chemotherapy in January, I was hardcore ketogenic diet, 72-hour fasting around each of my chemo treatments. And I did that through till about June.
So you were doing 72-hour fasts?
Yes, I would do a 72-hour fast. I did the research and read all of Dr. Longo's stuff, and what seemed to be, and there's no absolute consensus, but what seemed to be long enough to be effective but not miserable was about 36 hours pre-chemo, so about 1.5 days, and about 24 hours after chemo. And my chemo would run for about 8 hours because I had both an IV infusion and the peritoneal infusion. So yeah, I would arrive at the chemo clinic at about 7 in the morning to get my blood work done, get that done, wait for the clinic visit. After the clinic visit, you would go over to chemotherapy, and they get you set up. I would get an infusion line put in every time. I didn't have an infusion port. I just had the peritoneal port. So they'd have to put in an IV line, put in the pre-drugs, put in the IV chemo. Then they would take that one out. Then they would access my port. Then they would pour in the second drug. And then I'd have to spend an hour at the very end of the day. It's like 5 o'clock. It's dark outside. And I'd have to lay on that bed for an hour and swish back and forth, right? That was the hardest hour. And then we'd get in our car and drive 3 hours home. So it was an incredibly long day. But then I would stay fasted until supper time the following day, because my chemo ended about 6 o'clock. So,
Martha, based on what you've just explained, so can we simply say that one way to starve the cancer cells of fuel is obviously through fasting, and also eliminating or cutting down on your glucose intake or sugary carbohydrate intake, and also cutting down on your protein intake, because you said glutamine obviously is found in amino acids.
Now there's something about that though. Glutamine is the most abundant amino acid in our bodies, and we make it. It is what's called a non-essential amino acid. So we just make whatever we need. So dietary therapy wise, there is not much we can do to reduce glutamine circulating levels. The body does its own thing. Okay. There are drugs that Dr. Seyfried talks about that are not approved for this, but there are ways to try and get them that will reduce glutamine in the blood. But diet-wise, we can't reduce glutamine. Our strategies are based on reducing glucose and keep glucose intake, keeping the glucose levels low and very stable over the day with no spikes post-meal, because we also want to keep insulin very low, okay, and stable, and no spikes after meals, because insulin is a growth factor for cancer as well. And so that's kind of the goal of the diet, is to keep that fuel really low. Okay. Now, but in terms of protein, it's really important that we have adequate protein, but we also don't want excessive protein, because when you eat a lot of protein, you digest all those amino acids, not just glutamine, but all the amino acids. And for a while, they're floating around in your blood until we don't have a way to store them like we do with fat. So they end up getting metabolized into either sugar molecules or fat molecules, but the nitrogen gets pulled off them and they get turned into urea, and you pee out all that expensive urine. So our goal with protein is to have enough to support your healthy body, to have not an excessive amount, and to spread it out over the day so that you're not ever getting into those spikes of amino acids in your blood as well, right? So we usually set a protein goal and ask people to try and get to that goal, but to have it spread over 2 or 3 meals. So things like the OMAD, the eating once a day and stuff, that doesn't really work well for people with cancer, because you're putting too much in all at once if you're trying to nourish yourself all in one short spell, and then your body has to cope with it all. So spread it out.
As a type 1 diabetic, I know that excessive protein obviously will cause that blood sugar spike. And well, in order to prevent that, I used to do OMAD. I did it for years. In order to prevent that, obviously, I'm taking a larger dose of insulin to prevent that spike. And this on a low carbohydrate diet. So I'm not taking the glucose, but it's the protein that's actually spiking, or excessive protein, as you put it, spiking my blood sugars. And what really doesn't spike blood sugars as much is fat. So what was your ketogenic diet consisted of? What did it look like? What did you eat?
So when I did this 5 years ago, I knew less than I know now. And there was less information out there than what I know now. But I was eating 2 to 3 meals a day. Eggs figured in my diet. I have my own chickens in my backyard, so my eggs are fresh. And meat and vegetables. But I was also not beyond using things like a low carb bread. I would either bake a low carb bread, did a lot of that. I don't know that I've even found the carbonate bread when I was doing the keto during my chemotherapy. I think I was mostly just making my own bread. And I would make like a flat acacia bread that you just made on a cookie sheet. Interesting story. I've been making this low carb bread on and off for years using flax meal or almond flour, things like that. And after my first chemotherapy, I got into really serious problems with constipation. And I mean, I've never been constipated. When I was trying carnivore and stuff, it's like, oh yeah, so you don't poop every day, but when you do, it's fine. Like it's not hard to move. It's smaller, right? And I tell people that. But between the fasting for 3 days, the high dose steroids, the dexamethasone that they give you around chemo, which is despite all of its side effects, it is an important part of chemo. Don't ever let anybody talk you out of having particularly the pre-chemotherapy dex. Like, don't be afraid of the fact that it spikes your blood sugar and all that. It's important for reducing your response to those chemotherapy drugs. But I mean, my blood sugar would go through the roof. It's crazy, like up into diabetic ranges. And so between that and the dex and the anti-nausea pills and chemo itself, I got into some really, really big problems with constipation that first go around. And so I decided I was going to, figure out my own solution. So what I did was I made a modification to my focaccia bread, and I made it with 100% flax meal and psyllium husk. So instead of a cup of almond flour and a cup of flax meal mixed together in this to be the flour base, I did like a cup and a half of flax meal and half a cup of psyllium. And it makes like a pan of about 15 slices. But I call it my magic keto flax bread. There's a blog post on my website that has the recipe and the story behind it. But using a couple of pieces of that every day that I wasn't fasting was enough to never again have those problems with constipation. So it was a, you know, a sort of a homegrown solution. So my diet was pretty hardcore. I did absolutely no cheating, no sugar, no grains other than, like, say, the seeds that I would use for the breads and stuff, the flax meal and so on. And no alcohol. You know, I was feeling great, like normal, for 2.5 weeks out of every 3-week cycle. And so, you know, we'd be socializing and all that kind of stuff. But I never cheated, not once. So
How much protein were you eating per meal?
I wasn't counting.
You weren't counting.
But it was a normal middle-aged woman sort of portion. So, you know, probably between 4 and 6 ounces is what I would have had per meal, and vegetables, and then lots of healthy fats. Right. So the fat is, as you said, is super important.
So what were your fats? What were you doing? Adding butter to the vegetables?
Butter for sure. Extra virgin olive oil. I'm not a big fan of coconut oil. It's not my thing. Avocados. I did lots of avocados, and then meat fat. You know, bacon fat. Eggs contain fat. Cheese contains fat. Heavy cream, full fat sour cream. I used more dairy products than I probably would recommend nowadays, because I didn't know that dairy proteins can be a bit of a growth factor, particularly for hormone sensitive cancers. Not that I know, like I say, my cancer was gone before I got there, and we were doing the chemotherapy to catch any rogue cells that might have happened in a spill. And so my book has recipes for what I call comfort foods, because when you're going through chemo, you sometimes want comfort food. So there's a recipe in there for a keto version of a cream of mushroom soup, and cauliflower macaroni and cheese with bacon, and you know, and the breads, and you know, how to make a keto version of a smoothie, because everybody thinks a smoothie has to start with a banana. Well, it doesn't, you know, and stuff like that. So not a lot of recipes, but there's, you know, some recipes that I considered sort of comfort food. And then how to make bone broth. That was the other biggie that had to go in there, because bone broth is an important part of getting through a 72-hour fast.
Well, I recommend to everyone to, I will put the link below, to buy Martha's book. You have a whole chapter on the keto diet. You emphasize the quality of the foods you're eating. So there aren't keto junk foods in your plan.
Oh yeah, no, not like keto chocolate bark and keto tortilla chip or Dorito chips, and like,
or
not
keto
that
protein bars, and you find
Yeah.
out that they're not even keto. But
No, because a lot of them will actually spike blood sugars.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of conversations about that.
And I particularly love, by the way, your very last chapter. I think it was the very last chapter, very last chapter in the book, where you give you recipes, you share the recipes, and you also give a list of substitutes for flour and rice and the things that people love to eat. So you provide low carbohydrate substitutes.
I used to tell people that there's sort of 2 ways to approach a low carb diet. This is like even before keto. You can do all kinds of substituting type things to try and make your diet look like it looked before. So you can use the low carb breads, you can use the low carb rice, the low carb pastas, all those sorts of things to try and make your diet look like it looked before. Or you can just go to heck with convention. My plate is now going to look like meat and you know, multiple green and colored vegetables, and when people are starting out, I usually say that's the place to start. You know, do a couple of weeks of meat and veg and healthy fats, and get your mind into a new place. Then if you want, you start looking at things like keto breads and stuff. But you know, there are people who, when they don't feel well, nothing is going to sit as well as a piece of toast or some crackers. And you can get keto versions of those things. Some of them contain wheat. Oh my God. But, you know, it's wheat gluten. It's the protein in wheat, not the starch in wheat, right? And so, I mean, if you don't have a gluten intolerance, fine. If that makes you feel better, right? Then use them. Or there's all kinds of wonderful recipes out there for, you know, almond flour buns, the Diet Dr. buns, which are like famous for being wonderful, wonderful bread substitute. So, but you can make your food, like say, try and look as normal as possible. Normal being like what everyone else eats. And that's where those substitutes will be helpful. So, I mean, where I live now is kind of a mix of both. You know, last night we had salmon and broccoli and cauliflower with, you know, with an added fat, and it was delicious. But tonight I'm making that cream of mushroom soup from my book, and I will probably have some kind of bread or toast on the side. But mine will be a keto bread, and my husband, you know, like I'll probably fry a naan bread or something for him, and I'll eat keto toast. So, you know, and then if I'm making pasta, I'll make noodles for him, and mine might be on chunks of cauliflower, or it might be on some kind of shirataki noodle type thing. But yeah, and if I make eggs and bacon in the morning, I don't need toast, you know. I'll tend to build my husband's on a piece of toast, always organic, and I'll have mine just built on the plate, or I might have it on a piece of carbonate bread, depending on what I'm feeling like that day. So you have to, I tell people you have to think about what the long-term goal is, right? I mean, it's like fasting. If you are detoxing, you know, and that's kind of your goal, then maybe a water only fast is what you need. But when you're fasting to quiet down your healthy cells for chemotherapy treatment, like you want to stress the cancer cells and make your healthy cells go quiet, so they're not sending out growth signals. You can do that with coffee, and tea, bone broth, electrolyte drinks, you know, bubbly water, like whatever. You don't have to go water only. And for people who are going through cancer, geez, you know, having some comfort foods it's important. It's comforting.
Talking of cauliflower, by the way, I just remember that in the book you have cauliflower mac and cheese recipe as well.
Good. So good. Yeah.
Cauliflower mac and cheese recipe. Martha, now let's talk about the importance of family and having that support network around you. You do give credit to your husband and to the rest of your family, actually, for supporting you.
Yeah.
So,
he's my rock.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Cancer is not a journey that it's easy to take alone. I think you need to build what I call the circle of care or circle of support around you. One of the things that really surprised me about that process was having to tell people I had cancer. That was hard, really hard. You know, telling people that are in my immediate circle, like my family, and my close friends, they needed to be told face to face. Then I needed to tell coworkers, the people that I go to work with every day, and you know, some of them needed to hear it directly from me, the ones I'm really close to, but the rest, like I work in a building, a long-term care home with 150 employees. Mm-hmm. And so they needed to know too, right? And then the wider world. I mean, I wasn't going to hide under a wig or anything. I mean, I was going to be bald all winter, and like, you know, stuff happens, and I'm involved in lots of different organizations and things. So people were going to know. And I was okay with that. So I started a blog just to tell the whole world. And the blog ended up being the book, and here I am. But one of the things that I learned was that when you tell somebody that you have a diagnosis of cancer, they have to absorb that, and then you have to absorb their response. Mm. And that can be really hard, because I ended up being the one going, oh, but it's okay. it's stage one, you know, like, so I'm offering them reassurance as opposed to the other way around, because they're shocked, right? And another thing that really surprised me was that some people will back away from you when you have a diagnosis, and some people will come out of the woodwork when you have a diagnosis. You don't know. I don't blame anybody if they have to withdraw from my journey, because I don't know what their personal story is. Maybe they lost a parent to cancer. Maybe someone in the world is going through it right now. Maybe it's just more than emotionally they can handle. And so they will pull away and they won't be, you know, reaching out to you, or like they just kind of back off and disappear, which can be disconcerting if they're like a really close friend or family member. But on the other hand, I get that maybe there's something in their own background that they just can't cope. On the other hand, I had people come out of the woodwork, like people that I would consider, you know, acquaintances. And, you know, they were bringing dinner over to my house, and they were like showing up with a bouquet of flowers and sending me messages. Fascinating. I wrote a letter to my co-employees. I'm a contracted service at my nursing home, so I go in 1 or 2 days a week, and I've been there for 20 years, and I had 3 nursing homes. I gave 2 of them to a fellow dietitian, and I kept 1. And I had to go tell the administrator and my food service manager, who was a friend, and everybody that this is what I was going through, and they were going to be very flexible. It was all good. But then I put a letter on the fridge in the staff room that said, this is what I'm going to be going through. You know, my schedule will be erratic, but I will be here. You know, I'd appreciate your good wishes, you know, whatever. I put that up, and then I went back up to my office, and for the next day or two that I was there, I had people that I would consider a bare acquaintance, a PSW from some other wing who I had just, you know, asked about how a resident eats or something. So we had that kind of relationship. And they're coming to my door and wishing me well. You know, and it's like, and people that I go to a knitting group with who would say, you know, if you need something, if you need a ride or something, you just let me know. I'm free to do that with you. It's like, wow, you know, my neighbors in this little village up the road that I live near all went together when I got home from my surgery and arranged, you know, who was going to bring meals to the house. And they weren't low carb meals, but you know what? That's fine. Mike has to eat. My husband has to eat. So, you know, feeding my caregiver is just as good as feeding me, as far as I'm concerned. So it was a real eye-opening experience to deal with the diagnosis through the eyes of other people, and to see who stepped into that circle and who didn't, right?
How important was Mike's support to you, your husband's?
Oh God, he was everything. Mike and I have been together since we were teenagers. We've been married 39 years this year. And we have always been a good team. We're both very rational people. We don't fly off the handle or get, you know, super emotional about things. We're both very left-brained, analytical type people. He's an engineer. And we're also both pretty independent, and I'm independent. There's things in this house that I'm in control of, and I like to stay in control of, like food, like making meals and stuff. So I say Mike had this fine line to walk between. He never overwhelmed me with care, but he was always there when I needed it. So if I was feeling down or I was feeling weak or, you know, something, he was always there, but never like hanging over me. I think it's because my mother died when I was a teenager that I am fiercely independent. And as a teenager, I would go to like a friend's house, and their mom would want to do everything for me. Like I traveled with a girlfriend from first year college to Florida with her mom and her grandmother. And her mom wanted to like French braid my hair, and she wanted to butter my toast. And it's like, just leave me alone, you know? because
And do it.
at this point, my mother had died, and and I'd had several years of, taking over her role in the family and learning to cook and all that stuff, and so I couldn't be mothered. Don't mother me, right? And so that's the way I've always been, and that's the way it continued through cancer. I had a hard time actually being vulnerable and accepting help. I struggled with that because I've been the strong one, right? I've been the rock, and I had to be vulnerable, and I had to let Mike be my rock. So, yeah.
Is this the kick-ass attitude you talk about in the book?
The kick-ass attitude is about being empowered and about being an advocate for yourself. I realized early on when I started looking into cancer stuff that there's this whole mentality around being a victim of cancer, and oh, you poor dear, and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I am not a victim. I refuse to be a victim. And people, of course, then freeze up in fear. Like, okay, tell me what to do, doc. I'll do it. Like, no, they don't ask questions. They don't advocate for themselves. They're so terrified. And then they get the family who is terrified for them, which is, oh, you can't go against what the doctor says, that kind of stuff. So that's part of it. I knew I wasn't going to be a victim. But the other culture around cancer is being a warrior, being someone who is fighting cancer. And I thought, I don't want to be a warrior either. I mean, being a warrior means being battle ready. That's incredibly stressful. And it's like, stress is not a good thing. Stress is cortisol. Stress is up, increasing your blood glucose levels. It's feeling anger and anxiety together all the time. And it's like, I refuse to go there. So the concept of the cancer warrior, I kind of rebelled against as well, right? And that's the kick-ass part. I wanted to be a person who was knowledgeable and that used that knowledge to make the right decisions for myself, to collect information from as many places as I could get it, and be open to opportunity, and let the universe bring me things, because I firmly believe that when we connect to that universal energy, love, whatever you call it, some people call it God, some people call it universal energy, but you can attract to yourself things that will help you, put you forward. And so that's the kick-ass attitude. That's going into it as a person who is still in control of your life, and you're going to make your own decisions, and they're going to be based on all those things. You're not going to go into it through fear. You're not going to go into it through anger. You're not going to feel helpless. You are an active participant in this process, right? So that's the kick-ass attitude part.
Well, I think I can see the kick-ass attitude summarized in those words behind you, where you have thrive, nourish, joy, love, faith, abundance, yes, hope, love, imagine. Tell us about those words behind you, Martha. Okay. You told me it was a quilt, right?
This is a quilt, yes. So this quilt was made in the spring of 2020 when we were all in lockdown with COVID. So I was a year out of my cancer treatment. I had given away most of my quilting stuff over, I'd done it for 25 years, and I had given most of it away, but I had kept all the fabric I'd collected for this quilt, because I knew I wanted to make a word quilt, and I wanted it to be a positive word quilt. And so in 2020, in the spring, we suddenly lost everything. We lost all of our groups, all of our activities. Church was closed, the theater was closed, our evening activities were closed, the gyms were closed, everything was closed. And we were all incredibly fearful because we didn't know at that point. This was like a month or two into COVID. No vaccines, no knowledge. People were dying in droves. It was terrifying. And I was only a year out of my cancer treatment, and my immune system hadn't popped right back up to normal yet. So I was considered a bit of a risk. My husband, chronic asthmatic, he's in great shape, but he has chronic asthma. That could have put him in a life-threatening condition for COVID. So, we were scared. And I came up to this room. This is my office and sewing room. And I pulled that stuff out and I started making those squares for the quilt to use. And I had written down all these positive, affirmative words, and I built all these blocks, and then I laid them all out and built this quilt. So now it becomes the backdrop for the work that I do when I talk to clients, because being positive is so much a part of doing well in your cancer journey and in your life journey. But
that's true. And I was actually touched by a couple of phrases you used in the book, and you say, I have them here: love your body, love your cancer.
yes, that was one thing I learned when I wasn't going to be afraid and I wasn't going to be angry, is that the only way to really heal this is to approach it from the position of love. Because one of the things that I didn't get at first that I learned is that cancer is not a foreign invader. We are not fighting off an invading army. Cancer cells are us. They are our own cells, right? They're misguided, they're off on the wrong tangent, but they're still us. And so you really can't hate them, right? You can hate what they're, it's like your kids. You can't hate your kids. You can hate what they're doing, but you can't hate your kids, right? And so I approached it from that direction. So I would go to bed every night and I would put my hands on my belly and I would just send love into my lower abdomen, like where this, this chemo and the cancer had been and stuff. And really tried to always have that positivity and bring universal love into me, because that's what I really felt was going to be healing. So that's why I tell people, lots of people will say cancer is a journey and you'll be a different person when you get to the other end, and it can be a good thing. Like, there are lots of people. I'm an example of that. Granted, mine was stage 1. I realize that there are people going through a lot more difficult things, but the terror of getting a diagnosis and going through chemotherapy treatment is pretty much the same. And I came out the other end with a whole new passion for nutrition and the power of nutrition and what nutrition interventions can do to impact on your life and your health journeys. I mean, I've been a dietitian for decades. I was, and not feeling like I was overly successful for most of that time, because I was teaching that low fat paradigm. And so this had completely renewed my passion, which is why I wrote the book, which is why I started doing podcasts and conference talks and stuff like that, and how I ended up with Miriam working on her team. And so now a couple of days a week, I coach cancer patients.
Martha, can you tell the viewers how they can reach you?
Yes. Sorry, my voice is going. I have a website. It's marthatettenborn.com. On there is a blog and my story, and there's recipe blogs, and there's things about my cancer journey, stuff that interested me at the time. There's a blog in there about losing your hair.
Mm-hmm.
Anatomy, physiology, psychology. What's it like to lose your hair, right? That kind of stuff. There's lots of recipes, including the magic keto flax bread and bone broth and some desserts and stuff like that. But right now when I'm working with clients, I'm actually working through dietary therapies, which is Miriam Kalamian's practice. So if you go to the Work With Me page, that's what it says. It says go to dietary therapies. And I am a member of her team doing keto health coaching for cancer patients through dietary therapies. So you can also go to dietarytherapies.com, I believe it is. You know what? I'm going to pull that up and just make sure I'm giving you the right information. And she has a services page where you can connect with me or Miriam. If you have brain cancer, Miriam does the coaching. If you have other cancers, I do the coaching. Dietary therapies. Yes, dietarytherapies.com. That's right. So And I'm incredibly honored to be working with her. She is an amazing, amazing lady and an amazing resource.
Well, I'd love to bring her here as well. So, but I have to make sure I've read her book though. So that's my next goal. Martha, you have a copy of your book, right? Let's show it to the viewers and maybe finish this off, Hacking Chemo. Maybe we can finish this a wonderful conversation. I could easily talk to you for another hour, but I know we're busy people. So let's finish this episode with that beautiful poem that you start your book with.
Right here.
And so everyone, you're going to get emotional. So hear this beautiful poem and we'll wrap this up with it.
So this is a poem by Mariana Williamson, and I reached out to her and she agreed to let me use it in my book. It's called Our Deepest Fear. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. And as we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.
Martha Tettenborn, thank you so much for accepting my invitation and for very kindly sharing a copy of your book with me. We'll probably do this again some other time.
Would love it. I would love it. And I'm hoping to see you at a conference soon.
Thank you. Me too. Bye-bye. Bye for now.